Hello and welcome everyone. This is sixth lecture in this course, and today in this lecture we are going to discuss the next thinker and perhaps the most influential thinker in Western tradition of political thought, Aristotle. And on Aristotle we are going to have three lectures, and this is part 1 of that 3 lecture on Aristotle. In the first lecture we are going to discuss his views on ethics or virtue, and what does it mean to lead a good life, and how a good life is possible in the life of community. So, basically focusing on his text on Nicomachean Ethics, we are going to understand Aristotle views on virtue or ethics, and then in the next lecture we will discuss in detail his views on polis and what is his ideal state, how he conceptualized different kinds of polity or constitution and argued about a mixed constitution. And in the final lecture or third lecture on Aristotle, we are going to discuss his ideas on citizenship and also revolution and how to prevent the revolution before evaluating the contribution of Aristotle in thinking about the politics and how it helped or shaped the political thinking of many other thinkers in Western tradition, including many contemporary thinkers like John Rawls or communitarian and multiculturalist. So, Aristotle had an abiding or profound influence in the thinking and theorization about politics, and in today's we will see that how Aristotle was trying to extend the argument of Plato when he was arguing about the good or ethical life by also criticizing and providing us a very influential or pragmatic approach to the study of politics, that is the systemic or the pragmatic sense. So, the whole notion of politics is very different from the Platonian conception of politics, and in doing so he is also continuing the Platonic objective or purpose of how to lead a good life or eudaimonia, or that life is possible in the life of community, but how to achieve that life or how to create that community, there is a substantial difference between Plato and Aristotle, and this we are going to discuss in today's lecture. So, let us begin with this idea where Aristotle is credited with the conception of politics or political science as a more systematic or pragmatic approach to our life, and that has become the defining principle or defining ideas about the politics. So, politics in contrast to philosophy is a pragmatic science. It helps us understand our society, our community, and then how to make that community and society better. So, politics in that sense is a very pragmatic science, and Aristotle is credited with giving this new paradigm to the whole question of politics. So, in defining politics, unlike Plato, who was in the realm of idea or the definite or the certain knowledge of forms or good, for Plato it is much more pragmatic or knowledge which is produced through association with others, and that is the substantial shift in Aristotle approach to politics. So, he regarded politics as a master science. The reason being, unlike other discipline of knowledge such as philosophy or mathematics, politics is a more productive or pragmatic science which gives us not just the knowledge of the society, but also how to lead a good life, and that ethical component of politics is what makes it a desirable forms of knowledge, or a form of knowledge which is much more productive, much more pragmatic than other disciplines which is knowledge for the sake of knowledge. Purpose of knowledge for Aristotle which is acquired through politics is to lead a good life. To lead a good life is to lead a moral and ethical life, and that requires the sound knowledge or sound pragmatic wisdom. So, his approach to politics makes him, and many regards him as the father of political science, or someone who regarded politics as a master science, which allows us to negotiate between different positions, conflicting opinions, and often the political judgments require the knowledge of both the specificities and also the ethical, moral position, and that combination of ethical, moral knowledge and the knowledge of particular specific context enables the statesman to harmonize what is best, what is good for that particular time in that particular society. So, this approach of Aristotle towards politics, which is very pragmatic or empirical and scientific approach, makes him as the founder of the political science as a discipline. His was, as I said, a very systematic, empirical and very pragmatic approach to politics. So, he does not regard politics as a philosophical speculation and contemplation. It is a pragmatic science which gives us the knowledge of the world in which we live, and then it enables us to live a good life, a moral, ethical life in the world as it is, not as it should be or as it ought to be in our philosophical speculation and contemplation. So, according to Aristotle, the knowledge of politics help man live an ethical life, and this question of ethics we are going to discuss. What does it mean to lead an ethical life? This, to begin with, here you can think of ethical life is the realization of his full potentiality, that is eudaimonia. Often we translate this term eudaimonia as a life of happiness or flourishing, but eudaimonia is the Greek term which means the realization of the true potentiality, and how society help us in the realization of that true potentiality. So, only a good society or a just society will enable the individual to lead the fullest moral, ethical life, that is the true nature of his being. So, as a moral being, the true realization or the actualization of potentiality requires the knowledge of politics, and here the politics, as we know in today's term, is not just about the power for the sake of power, but politics is an art and science which enables us to lead an ethical and moral life. And to lead an moral ethical life is not to have just the philosophical contemplation, but also the pragmatic knowledge. So, in Aristotle we will see that how he combines the knowledge with the experience. So, the judgment that is required to lead a good life requires that the individual is rational, therefore, he or she will have judgment, but that judgment should not be based on philosophical speculation or the knowledge of books alone. He or she should also have the knowledge of the pragmatic living or the experiences, and that combination of experience and the knowledge of moral or ethical principles enables the individual to take good judgment or just judgment. So, Aristotle do not give us the exact principle to follow and regard it as the moral or ethical. Individual himself or herself arrive at that moral ethical judgment when he or she combines the knowledge of ethics or morality with the knowledge of pragmatic world, and that enables the possibility of realizing one's true potentialities. That is what Aristotle argues, and for him that ethical or moral life man can live only in a community or polity. So, there is no question of living an ethical life outside the community, and that is very different from our modern understanding of moral and ethical life, which is too much subjective or individualistic. So, a modern age to a great extent is also seen as the age of individual innovation, individual knowledge, individual wisdom and so on. But Aristotle was imagining an ethical life for the individual only in the community. Outside the community, according to Aristotle, only the gods or the beast lives. Man realizes his true ethical or moral potentialities only in the community. So, Aristotle in his approach to politics differs substantially from Plato. And in contrast to Platonic vision of politics, which as we have discussed, driven by the harmony of existence. So, Plato was always looking for that certain knowledge or unchangeable forms of goods that will help the philosopher king to ensure the life of harmony, where every class will do act according to their own nature, and there will be no need of laws interference in each other works, and there will be the life of perfect harmonious human being realizing their true self or true potentialities. Now, in contrast to this kind of Platonic conception, Aristotle wanted political knowledge to be based on the pragmatic wisdom, and therefore politics is a pragmatic science. And this pragmatic wisdom enables the individual who is rational, moral or ethical being to have a good judgment. Now, to have a good judgment, Aristotle do not give us the definite maxim of what is good or what is bad. He gives us the mechanism to arrive at the good judgment. So, a rational person with practical wisdom will always have the good judgment. So, it cannot be pre-given. So, it requires the knowledge of both, the knowledge of ethical and moral being, which human beings are essentially, and also the pragmatic knowledge of his life or in the community or the society, and that combination enables the individual to arrive at this good moral ethical judgment, which is called phronesis in Greek, which is very different from the Platonic conception of theory of forms or theory of good. And therefore, in Aristotle you have simultaneous presence of both deontology or a kind of many people will argue relative notion of morality and ethics. He is also seen as someone who is conservative or status quoist or conventionalist. Many people will regard him as the radical or revolutionary thinker as well, because of his theory on revolution, which we will discuss later in this course. So, his influence on the theory of politics or the history of political thought and also natural science. Let us not forget that Aristotle has also influenced many natural scientists such as Galileo in the modern astronomical or physical science was deeply influenced by Aristotle method of explaining the phenomena. So, it is not just to have the intuitions and knowledge on the basis of one's speculation, it must be explained and explained in a manner where it is possible to experiment. It should not be subjective or contemplative alone, it has to be explained. And similarly, his notion of morality or ethics or human nature or why to lead a life in the community is explained in a objective pragmatic manner, not in a philosophical speculative manner. So, Aristotle has influenced or shaped not just the political thinking or theorization, but also many other natural science such as physics, biology, medicine and others. And particularly in the history of political thought in Western tradition, if you look at the contribution of Hobbes, who begins his theory by studying the human nature, or Kant, who talks about the categorical imperative or a priori maxim, or even to a great extent Hegel was deeply influenced by the political thinking and theorization of Aristotle, particularly his works Politics, and in many modern university history of Western political thought begins with Aristotle, and it is also a point where we have to think that what we have today as the writings of Aristotle is not in an orderly manner. Many scholars have argued that access that we have to Aristotle writings is at the best the lectures taken by his disciples, and in modern European discourse on the political thought or the history of political thought, it is through the translation of Aristotle works by Ibn Sina or Ibn Rushd in Arab tradition, and then from Arabic to it was translated to modern English. So, there is a lot of contradictions or ironies or ordering about the politics and also about the other works of Aristotle. So, we do not have the exact access to the proper ordering of Aristotle works. However, it has influenced a number of thinkers, not just the political thinkers and philosophers, but also the natural scientists, as I have said. So, his works also influenced the deontological thinkers like Kant, Hans Kelsen and John Rawls, who is famous for a theory of justice and its deontological basis, and also multiculturalist and the communitarian thinkers in contemporary continental philosophy, who argued that human being is not, as many liberals argue, as self-defining atomistic individual, but an embedded individual who derives his or her notion of good, bad, desirable, undesirable from the community in which he lives. So, the multiculturalist argument or the communitarian arguments that human self or subjectivity is the embedded subjectivity also has its roots in Aristotelian thinking, when he argues that human beings by nature is the associational being, that is he or she realize his true ethical or moral potentiality only in a community. Now, if you look at the brief bio sketch or life journey of Aristotle and his major works, he was not an Athenian, and yet he spent most of his productive years in Athens. So, Aristotle was born in a remote town in Stagera in Macedonia, and his father was a physician in Macedonian court, and his early interest was in the study of biology and medicine. However, in his youth as 17 years old, he went to Athens to study philosophy in the academy of Plato. So, he came to Athens as a 17 years old to study philosophy under the tutelage of Plato, and he spent most of his productive years there, but he was not a native citizen of Athens and hence could not participate in the active politics of the polis. Although he has the friends among the oligarchs and also among the democrats, but he himself could not participate in the political life of Athens, and yet the political discourse, debates and the way Athenian society governed itself was something which Aristotle appreciated, and as we discussed that both Plato and Aristotle was trying to restore the order, the morality, the justness in the management of common affairs, which was decaying morally. So, Aristotle stayed in the academy of Plato for 20 years and left after the death of Plato in 347 BC. He is also someone who has the distinction of teaching the world conqueror or Alexander the Great for 6 years, and he returned to Athens in 335 BC and established his own academy, which is called Lyceum, and it is different from Plato Academy, where he studied, and it was the dominant school for teaching in the art of metaphysics, politics, poetry and so on. Aristotle, when he returned to Athens in 335 BC, he established his own academy, which is called Lyceum, and he followed and promoted scientific, empirical and pragmatic knowledge of the world. So, the initial training of Aristotle in biology, and the knowledge of biology requires the knowledge of organs, the classification of organs, and understanding the nature of organs by its function, by its performance, by its realization of its true potentiality, shaped the political thinking or theorization of Aristotle in the later years as well. And his academy can be truly regarded as the university in the modern sense of the term. So, the subjects from biology to theology, metaphysics to astronomy, mathematics to botany, meteorology, ethics, rhetorics and poetics, as well as the art and science of politics were taught in the Lyceum that Aristotle established. And he was the first to develop the science and art of constitution making and just state. So, how to organize or form a just state, and how that just state should be governed by the constitution, which should be mixed constitution, and what should be the nature of that just state or the constitution, we will discuss in the next class. But this knowledge of just state and constitution making is not through philosophical speculation, but by classifying the existing knowledge, the prevalent opinion, and then on the basis of that developing the correct knowledge or sound judgment about the desirable or undesirable political action for the individual and also for the society and community. So, he was the first who developed the science and art of constitution making and just state by studying the 158 constitution, and this was a kind of remarkable feat considering the constraints of his time. He collected 158 constitution, and through comparison of these constitution he arrived at the classification of constitution and how to create a good just society, which we are going to discuss later. But the very knowledge of that good society or correct political judgment is on the basis of empirical, scientific, pragmatic study of existing phenomena, not the Platonic ways of knowing what is the true, certain, unchangeable forms devoid from the pragmatic manifestation of those. So, if you look at the time of Aristotle, it was a time when the self-sufficient autonomous city-states in Greek civilization was gradually giving way to the rise of big empires. So, the arts, philosophy, culture developed in the Greek city-states because of the nature of these city-states, which was self-sufficient, distinct, autonomous from each other, and most of the productive works were done by the slaves, and the male citizens were then left to think about managing the common affairs in a much more ethical, moral and just manner. And how to do it? Socrates began, and Plato thought about in a different way. Aristotle gives the different meaning or connotation to the whole objective of politics and ideal state. So, in Aristotle time, what was happening, that these self-sufficient autonomous city-states were gradually giving way to the rise of big empires. So, the King Philip who was the first empire builder, so to say, which tried to unite in the small or self-sufficient autonomous city-states and to create a major political force or kingdom. So, King Philip initiated this process of empire building, which was taken to the extreme by his son Alexander the Great, and ultimately Greek city-states and its grandeur were replaced by the rise of Roman Empire, which dominated the politics, thought and philosophy of Europe throughout the classical and much of the medieval period. So, Aristotle was thinking or writing about politics or ideal state in a time when it was a kind of transition from the Greek city states to the big empires. So, to talk about briefly about the personal life of Aristotle. So, as I said that he was revered in Athens. So, he had many disciples, but he was not welcome in the city as Macedonia, his native state, has defeated Athens twice. Although he had the support of Macedonian rulers and later from a tyrant called King Hermias, whom he said to have thought, and also he married to his niece or daughter. So, Aristotle has enough royal support to pursue his science or his knowledge production, and the way he tried to impart the knowledge among his disciples. So, in that pursuit he had the support of royalty. However, after the death of Alexander in 323 BC, resentment in Athens against the Macedonian overlordship forced Aristotle to flee Athens, and he died in exile aged 62 in 322 BC. So, Aristotle spent most of his productive years in Athens, first as a student and later as the philosopher or teacher in his renowned academy, which is called Lyceum, and he wrote and collected materials in all the branches of learning, including biology, physics, medicine, zoology, botany, and also politics. His Lyceum had a library which is remarkable for his time. So, the knowledge production is not merely than the exercise of speculation and contemplation, also that is necessary part of it, but it has to be grounded in the real empirical pragmatic world. So, he is credited with this library, and also he was the one who founded the first zoo. So, his scientific knowledge of a phenomena was based on the study of the nature of the objects, its classification among the other species in the world, and its function. So, we will see that how he applied this in understanding the human nature. So, his understanding of morality, ethics, polity is based on his understanding of human nature, which is for him ethical and moral being, and the whole purpose of politics is to realize that ethical and moral life in the life of community. His major works are Metaphysics, Nicomachean Ethics, Politics and Rhetorics. However, Politics is regarded as his magnum opus, that is the most celebrated work of Aristotle, where he illustrates his vision of the ideal polity and the role of politics in that polity. Nicomachean Ethics deals with the idea of how to lead a good life, how virtue is central to leading a good life, and how to achieve such good life or moral ethical life in the community. So, this Nicomachean Ethics of Aristotle could be seen as an introduction to his politics, to which we turn. So, we will discuss Aristotle's idea of ideal state, classification of constitution in the next lecture. In today's lecture, in the remaining part, we are going to discuss his views on virtue, his views on ethics or morality. But before we turn to that, it is also necessary to understand the difference and similarities between Plato and Aristotle. Now, this particular sentence sums up this relationship between Plato and Aristotle, where he writes that dear is Plato, but dearer still is the truth. So, the whole idea of searching the truth is not something which is restrained by his reverence to Plato. So, he regard Plato as the philosopher or a teacher which should be respected, which is dear to him, but truth and the search after truth is much more dearer than the Plato or reverence to the Plato. So, Aristotle's vision of politics and ethics was, however, profoundly shaped and influenced by teachings of Plato. Plato adored him and regarded him as the brightest of his disciples, and although in the later period it is fashionable to pit Plato against the Aristotle or Aristotle against the Plato. However, both the thinkers did share many common ideas, such as what is the purpose of life, and that purpose is the realization of full human potentiality, that is eudaimonia, which we translate as happiness or living a flourishing life, but it has much more broader connotation in Greek times than we have it now. So, if we translate it, say eudaimonia means leading a happy life. Now, a happy life, how we are going to lead it? Is it through accumulation of wealth or by gratification of many of our sense desires, or what we call self indulgence? That cannot lead us to lead a good life. Good life requires a knowledge of ethics or morality, and that search for, and this is much more in Kantian philosophy when we will discuss categorical or hypothetical imperative. So, we do certain things because it helps us in gratification of some of our desires, some of our appetites, but that is not the realization of eudaimonia or the true potentialities of human. To be human is to be ethical and moral being, and the whole purpose of politics is to enable the condition where human being can lead a good ethical and moral life. So, both Plato and Aristotle share this idea that the purpose of life is the realization of true potentialities, and a happy life is virtuous life, and a virtuous life is possible only in a virtuous and a just polity. So, here in Aristotle what you find is a kind of circular argument, not really the clear cut definition or proposition to lead a good life. He argues that a good life is the virtuous life, a virtuous life is possible only in the city, and the city should be virtuous and just to enable the condition which will allow the individual to lead a virtuous life. So, there is a kind of circular argumentation in Aristotle rather than giving a more concrete proposition, and that allows different interpretation of ethics and morality or virtue in Aristotle works. So, deontological thinkers will interpret in a different way, multiculturalist or the communitarian will interpret Aristotelian ethics in a different way. So, coming back to the difference or the similarities between Plato and Aristotle, the significant, so there is a similarities between the two thinkers, but the profound difference or the significant difference between the two was in their understanding of and approach to the politics, and this difference is beautifully depicted by Raphael in his painting which is called the School of Athens. So, if you can think of now Platonic conception of physics or metaphysics or politics taught in his academy and Lyceum of Aristotle. So, if these two schools is compared and the name of this painting is given as the School of Athens, Raphael project both Plato and Aristotle by describing or depicting Plato as otherworldly and seen gesturing towards the heaven. So, he is looking up to have the knowledge of the world, which is the imperfect manifestation of something certain, something unchangeable, that is through the knowledge of metaphysics, mathematics or dialectics only the philosopher can comprehend. For the rest of the population it is incomprehensible, and philosopher then enlighten them about the theory of the forms and theory of the good, and therefore his justification for the philosopher rule or rule by the philosopher king. Whereas in this painting Aristotle was pointing towards the ground. So, to have the knowledge of the good or ethical judgment, one must understand or examine the phenomena as they are in the world in which we live, not outside of it, not in the heaven. So, this beautifully depicts the difference between Plato and Aristotle. So, thus for Aristotle, politics as a pragmatic science should concern with what is rather than what ought to be. Now, if we understand this difference between Plato and Aristotle approach to politics, we should not construe it as Aristotle is someone who is denying any role of ethics and morality or ideal forms or the notion of good in politics. In fact, the very purpose of politics, which is the science and art of ethics as well, for Aristotle is to ensure the ethical and moral lives of the individual. So, very purpose of politics for Aristotle is then to create the condition to enable the human being to have the good judgment about how to lead a good life, and that is something which requires associational life with others in the community. So, one cannot be ethical outside the community, living on his or her own terms. That is perhaps the contradiction of modern life, where we think that being moral is to something which is individual centric, but so there is the kind of contradiction you will find that one profess something but practice something differently, and thereby there is a contradiction in the self itself. So, to lead a true moral ethical life in true sense of the term is to live with others, and that living with others help us realize our true ethical moral being, not without the community, not without the associational life, as many would argue that you have to be truthful or moral or ethical without any regard for what is the prevalent norms of morality and ethics in your society. So, that is something which Aristotle disapproved of. So, what is then ethics and virtue in Aristotle? So, man is, as Aristotle argued, by nature a social and political animal. The one who does not live in a society or community is either a god or a beast. So, that is the positioning of human being in the realm of god, beast and other species in the world. Man is by nature a social and political animal, and he realizes his true potentialities only when he lives in the community. Outside the community, outside the state, only gods and beasts can live. So, Aristotle's political theory starts with the study of, as I said, the organ, the basis of the whole argument about the ideal polity or ideal society or moral and ethical life, with the understanding of the nature of the man, who according to Aristotle is the june politican. June politican means the social and political animal. So, thus he classifies man as animals among the many species in the world. So, guided by the zoological or botanical understanding of the species in the world, he regarded man as animal among the species. However, he regards man as distinct from other species in terms of being both rational and also having the language to communicate their ideas, and that capacity of being rational and having the language to communicate one ideas to other distinguish man from the other species in the world according to Aristotle. So, he argues that man alone is capable of or having a sense of what is good and evil, just and unjust. So, he add one more characteristic to human nature, that is he or she is rational and also having a language to communicate his ideas to others, but he or she also have a sense of justice, a sense of morality, and this again is something which is not clearly spelled out, and this we can later on construe on the basis of the idea that any action that helps the object to realize its true potentiality is good, or any action that is not helping the object to realize its true potentiality is bad. So, for example, a knife has to be sharp. Now, the sharpness is the potentiality of a knife or true nature of knife. So to perform its action in a manner which helps its sharpness, which allow it to perform its action is good, and anything that do not help it in realizing its potentiality is bad. So we will come back to this question, but here to understand the human nature, he realized or argues that human nature is also essentially moral and ethical, and that makes a man by nature a moral and ethical being. And the nature of a thing for Aristotle lies in three things basically: the soul, which is psyche, the purpose, which is the telos, and its function, that is organ. So all the things and objects in the world constantly try to realize its full potentiality, and in the pursuit of that realization, it is driven by its purpose. So for a seed, its purpose is to become a plant, and in that process, so that is the telos of the seed, to become a plant, to become a tree. So the whole purpose of seeds and its action is to realize the growth of a full plant. So is the life of human being. All the human beings are rational, moral, but in the pursuit of his rational moral life, many of the human beings will be insane or behave in the irrational manner, but that does not undermine the fact that all human beings are by nature capable of leading a moral and ethical life. So ultimate purpose or eudaimonia of living the life to the fullest potential of being human is to lead a moral and ethical life, even when there is diversion. So any such divergence which leads to lead immoral, unethical or irrational life is bad or unethical, and that is true in contemporary discourse also. Certain actions, certain human beings, certain ideals which you imitate for your own life, there is certain things which motivates you, and that often is a sense of ethics, a sense of morality guided by reason and rationality. And there are also the examples who are corrupt, morally corrupt, ethically corrupt, and you try to distance from those person, those behaviors, those actions, and that is what is at the root of philosophical understanding of telos or teleology. So the nature of any object, including the human being, for Aristotle is to be understood on the basis of these three things: soul, purpose, and also the function of that object. So thus a good life for Aristotle is to act according to one's nature, performing one's task and thereby realizing one's full potential. So it is true with plant, it is true with knife, it is true with human being, it is true with horse or every single object on this planet. So all the objects will have its own nature, and its whole function is to realize that full potentiality or the full realization of his or its own nature. So thus at all times things are in the constant movement from potentiality to realization and beyond to decay and transformation. That is the movement in the life of any object. So human being from the childhood to birth, death, constantly tries to perfect itself, and the perfection requires living the associational life with others, and thereby constantly trying to perfect the moral, ethical understanding of life, and thereby living a good, happy, moral and ethical life. So he argued that the fully human life is associational life, living together harmoniously in the community or polis with others. This polis or community for Aristotle is not merely a political body, but also an ethical body based on certain shared values, which we will come to in a moment. So basically the knowledge of teleology or telos according to Aristotle is necessary to know the nature of the objects. It is to be recognized by identifying the end result or final outcome of an object, for example the seed and the tree. So the tree is in the telos of the seed. So, the ultimate function and purpose of a seed is to become a tree. So is the human being. Ultimate objective is to lead an ethical life. So it starts with the household or in the community and finally in the polis. And the full realization of ethical moral life is possible according to Aristotle only in the polity or in the state. So the telos of a man is to achieve self perfection or happiness, which is eudaimonia, by living an ethical and moral life. Moral or ethical life is possible only in political community. So outside the political community, the kind of life that is possible is that of beast or god, and human beings are neither beast nor god. Now as a human being, then to realize or perfect one moral and ethical life is to live in the community with others harmoniously. So living in the community requires the knowledge of politics, which in the broadest sense of the term necessitates the knowledge of ethics. So there is a kind of Greek integration of ethics with politics. Now in the contemporary understanding, we often associate politics as the knowledge of power and how to acquire power for the sake of it. But in the Greek understanding of politics or the knowledge of politics requires the knowledge of ethics, and then how to realize that ethics in the given circumstances in a given society with the knowledge of its convention and customs, and that is the whole pursuit of ethics and virtue according to Aristotle. So therefore at the beginning of Nicomachean Ethics, Aristotle regards politics as a master science. Why? It is not just the knowledge about the world as it is there in the other subjects, but also it is the knowledge which help us to lead a good life, unlike other subjects. So one can be happy with contemplating or thinking about knowledge which is in itself sufficient, but here in the political knowledge you have the potentiality or the scope of living a good moral ethical life as well, and that is the whole task of politics. So although he regards politics as a master science, he thought of it as an inexact, that is not precise, not is fixed science, although it is a productive science, but it is inexact in a sense. It is different from the exact or the esoteric science like mathematics or physics, and he also differentiated it from philosophical speculation and intuition, which he regarded as knowledge for the sake of knowledge. Somebody may enjoy that knowledge, but to lead a moral ethical life one needs to have the knowledge of politics, which also require the knowledge of ethics as a rational being. So he argued that the knowledge of politics should be based on the observable phenomena and the pragmatic wisdom or judgment. Now as I said that this knowledge of pragmatic wisdom is very unique, where there is no given proposition as to how to arrive at a moral judgment. He believes that human being as a rational ethical being, when he combines the knowledge of ethics with the pragmatic knowledge of the world in which he lives, the combination of it allows the person to arrive at a good moral judgment at any given point of time. So thus good or right judgment is based on the knowledge of general, that is the ethics or the universal, as well as the specificities of the context, the politics. So it is to be acquired not only through the knowledge of books, but also through experience, that is through associational life with others in the community. So he argued that the moral and ethical question is a matter of choice and character that applies to human lives and their community alone. Now he is making a crucial point here, where he is arguing that the question of morality and ethics is always a kind of dilemma, whether to pursue it or not, and why there is a need to think about the moral and ethical dilemma. And in the politics it is always there, how you combine and make the balance between two competing moral or ethical position. That requires the knowledge of the specific customs and conventions in the society, and also the knowledge of a general or universal understanding of ethics. And this is applicable only to the human society or human community. Why we need ethics and morality, he explains, because it helps us to live a better life, to live a more happier life. And that is why he says that morality and ethics is something which is applicable only to the humans and human society, and not to the other species like beast in the jungle or other phenomena or natural phenomena like mountains or rivers. So, the question of ethics and morality is applicable only to the human being. Why? Because it helps the human being to live a better life or more just life, and that is the role of ethics and politics. Okay, so although the morality and ethics is helpful to lead a full human life, however, the condition of man is different, and Aristotle argue that men are neither beast. So, we are not animal that will gratify only our senses, that is hunger, sex, and accumulation or assertion of our dominance. So, we are not beast in that sense, but we are also not God who knows everything, who has the transcendental understanding, so to say, what is correct in all the situation. So, human beings are placed in a position where they are partly beast or driven by the appetites, which is the characteristic of a beast or animals, but we are also moral and ethical beings, which enables us to distinguish between good and bad, desirable, undesirable, just and unjust. So, this idea that men are neither beasts nor gods, do they share some attributes of both, and that gives us the unique position and requires us to strive for arriving at the correct moral political judgment. So, therefore, he questions any transcendental or universal theory of ethics or morality and good. So, there could not be one principle applicable in the all contexts historically without any distinction. He refute any such understanding of morality and ethics. So, instead, as an empiricist and conventionalist, he insisted on the scientific study of the particular, the local and historical specificities to examine different ethical or moral ideals or values that are observable in different societies. So, Aristotle appears to be the propagator of the golden mean principle, that is to avoid the extremes. So, in Aristotle approach to ethics, and also we will see how he apply this in his description of ideal polity or ideal life, is to avoid the extremes. So, suppose what is to be courageous? For Aristotle, courageous has to be a mean point between recklessness, that is you jump to the situation, and also the cowardice, you do not say anything. Or what is truth? Is it to be ruthless or to be obscure? So, there has to be a balance, there has to be a mean point, and that mean point is virtuous, that he called the golden mean principle, that is to avoid the extremes, and extremes of anything for Aristotle is vice. And now, how you arrive at this mean point or the golden point is something that requires the combination of your knowledge with the experience in the world or in that given society. So, this golden mean principle becomes more explicit in his description of ideal state and classification of constitution, which we are going to do in the next class. However, by ethical value, Aristotle meant also certain action to be just in itself, that is, the moral or ethical action is not justified on the basis of its intention or consequences. So, something will be morally unjust in itself. So, for instance, murdering or murder, lying or cheating, adultery are morally corrupt or morally wrong, and honesty, truthfulness, courage are good in itself. And it gives ethics a kind of generality or universality which is applicable in all contexts. However, the realization of it requires the knowledge of the particular, the knowledge of the specificities, and thereby the whole idea of ethical and moral norms for Aristotle is not just having deontological, universal or general understanding of ethics, but the knowledge of the specificities or the particularities, and which he makes in his description of ideal polity as well. So, Aristotle's ethics is based on the principle of justice as both fairness or impartiality. So, you do not discriminate, you treat individuals in the fair manner in the polity, and a sense of proportional equality, and that is the hallmark of Aristotelian ethics. So, he wanted everyone to be treated equally in the state or polity who are equals. So, the proportional equality or fairness or impartiality for Aristotle, which is based on the moral laws, that leads to the physical laws or constitution, if you like. The basis of the constitution and the laws are these moral ethical principle or the shared values in any society. So, the justice for Aristotle is both fairness or impartiality, that is non-discrimination, and also a sense of proportional equality, and here one has to be a bit cautious about Aristotelian ethics, where he argues that in the state everyone should be treated equally. So, we will see in the next class that how he differentiate individual life from a household life to a life in the society or community, and then finally in the polity or ideal state. So, there are different position of individual in the equality, where they are in the household. So, if there is slaves or women and men, then the position of men is superior to women and women position is superior to slaves. But in the life of the polity, when we will discuss his views on citizens, we will find that how he has the absolute notion of equality there. So, his approach to justice is the combination of both fairness and impartiality with a sense of proportional equality, which treats everyone equally who are equals and unequals who are unequally, and this is the foundation of mathematical reasoning. That is, if two things are same and equal to the third thing, they are equal to each other. Now, on that position, you have the similar arguments in Aristotle approach to the proportional equality also. So, he wants male who are free from the productive labors, unlike slaves, to be treated equally, but he do not want men and women or male or the slaves to be treated equally, because they are by nature created unequal. So, therefore, he regards that everyone is not equal by nature, hence slavery is justified, and he justified the slave and master relationship, which we will discuss later in this course. So, he also justified the subordination of women to men's authority, which is morally repugnant to our own sensibilities in modern times. However, in his conception, the natural talents or the skills of women is inferior that to male, but superior to the slaves, and similarly slaves have inferior qualities than the males, and therefore, the unequal treatment of them is morally justified. So, he justified the subordination of women and slaves to the male. Therefore, the ethical behavior and virtue in Aristotle's view are based not only on the abstract or the general idea of justice, that is a moral position which would be applicable historically in all the contexts without any discrimination. He wanted that the concrete realization in practice is subjected to the knowledge of customs and conventions in a given society or polity, and that is the hallmark of Aristotelian ethics, or leading a moral ethical life for the individual. So, individuals are rational, although they are animals, or they are animals who live a life in the community or in the society, and beyond that there is the life of beast or gods, which human beings are not. This human being is also then animal, but rational animal, having a language to communicate his ideas to others, and thereby they have the potentiality to realize it to the fullest possibility in the life of community, while they live the associational life with others. So, there is a kind of merger of prophecy and the practices, actual leading, which requires the knowledge of ethics, which is general or the abstract universal, but also the practical specificities of the society's customs and traditions, and the merger of these two leads to the practical judgment or the moral judgment at any given point of time, and that is the kind of relentless pursuit for the individual to lead a moral, ethical and virtuous life, which is possible only in the city. And that was my take or discussion on the Aristotle views on virtue and ethics. We will move on to his views on polity and the classification of constitution in the next class. On the topics that we have covered in today's lecture, you can refer to some of these books, which is part of other lectures as well, like David Beecher and Paul Kelly, Political Thinkers from Socrates to Present. Will Durant you can refer to. Murray, Forsyth and Maurice Kinsoper is a good introduction to the thought of Aristotle, particularly his views on teleology or telos, ethics and morality. Also Cephali Jha is a good introduction to Aristotle's thought, and Alan James Ryan on politics, a history of political thought from Herodotus to the present. So, these are some of the texts you should refer to understand Aristotle's views on ethics and politics. Do share your comments and feedbacks, we will be happy to respond to. So, thanks for listening. Thank you all.